The year was 79 AD, and beneath the thunder of 50,000 Roman voices echoing off marble and blood-stained stone, a different kind of war was taking place, one the crowd would never see. While spectators roared above, drunk on wine and violence, in the tunnels below the Colosseum, something colder, darker, more permanent was happening. It wasn't about the clash of steel. It wasn't about the rush of victory. It was about what came after the fight, when the gates closed, when the bodies were cleared, when the sand turned silent, but the victors still had one more prize to claim. They called it Victoria Carnalis, the carnal privilege of victory. And it wasn't just allowed. It was written into law. Gladiators didn't just win fights. They won women, Roman captives, slaves, daughters of nobles, priestesses, rebels. It didn't matter. They were trophies, tokens of conquest, property, and yet, within that perfect machinery of Roman brutality, on one sweltering August afternoon, something went wrong. His name was Valyrius Maximus, and he wasn't just another gladiator. He was the gladiator, tall, scarred, the kind of man whose name children shouted in alleyways and senators whispered over goblets of wine. He had survived 14 years in the arena, longer than any man should. Every inch of his skin told a story, some brutal, some glorious, all soaked in blood. His body was a map of Rome's cruelty, but he never forgot that he was born a slave. His father had been executed for debt when Gas was only 9. He was sold before he understood what selling meant, and Rome had taught him over and over that survival came through silence and steel. But that day, something cracked. Gas had just defeated the champion of the Deian rebels, a people crushed under the boots of Rome, their resistance shattered. The emperor himself, Titus, had watched from the imperial box as Gas split the rebel's skull with a final blow, so clean, so theatrical, that the sand barely had time to soak up the blood before the crowd was roaring his name. And for that victory, Gas was entitled to his prize, gold, a laurel crown, wine, and first choice among the 124 Deian women who'd been paraded behind the spoils of war. Not just any women, daughters of tribal leaders, temple servants, wives of warriors who died trying to protect them. Rome knew exactly what it was doing. Among those captives was a girl barely 19, with black hair tangled from dust and marching, but eyes that refused to fall. Livia, daughter of a Deian chief, had lost everything. Her village burned, her fiancé cut down, her people enslaved. She had spent 3 months in chains, enduring hunger, cold, shame, not knowing where they were taking her. But she still walked like someone who remembered being free. That made her dangerous. In the holding cells beneath the Colosseum, the guards prepared the women as they always did. Not like people, like inventory. They were bathed, hair combed, tunics changed to white linen, soft enough to look clean, thin enough to reveal. Notes were taken, ages, resistance level, willingness, all written on wax tablets like they were cataloguing cattle. Livia was noted as unbroken, which meant desirable, but watch her. They weren't being treated for mercy. They were being polished for presentation. As Gas stood in the corridor, sweat and blood drying on his skin, the master of games approached with a bronze tablet in hand. It gleamed under torchlight, heavy with authority. "The Emperor acknowledges your triumph," he said, voice echoing off the stone. "By ancient law and imperial decree, you are entitled to the spoils of conquest." Gas didn't need to read the tablet. He knew the list by heart: gold, wine, a bath. And at the bottom, always in the same cruel handwriting, Victoria Carnalis. He was led to the chamber where he would make his choice. A guard opened the small viewing panel into the cell where Livia and others waited. Gas looked inside, and for the first time in a long time, something inside him shifted. She didn't cower like the others. She didn't weep. She didn't look at him like he was a monster, though she had every reason to. She looked through him. And in that moment, Gas didn't see a prize. He saw a mirror. Another person who had been dragged through Rome's machine and spit out on the other side. Still breathing, still standing. He looked at the guard. "This one," he said, quietly, and the machine moved forward. But what happened next wouldn't go the way anyone expected. Not Gas, not Livia, and not the empire that had spent centuries perfecting the art of making victory taste like blood and submission. Because this time, Rome had made one mistake. They forgot that even gladiators could remember how to feel. The chamber where they took her wasn't dark. That was the first thing Livia noticed. The stories whispered between the women in the holding cells always described shadows and filth, rough stone floors, and cold iron chains. But this room, it was clean. Not comfortable, not welcoming, but clean, lit by oil lamps placed in niches carved into the walls. The bench was smooth stone. Drainage grooves were cut neatly into the floor. The rings embedded into the walls had been positioned with mathematical precision. It was a place designed not for chaos, but for order. The kind of terrifying order only a state like Rome could impose. She was alone when they locked the door. Her hands trembled, though she refused to cry. Her knees buckled for a second, but she didn't fall. Instead, she leaned against the far wall, one arm crossed over her chest, like she could somehow shield herself from what she knew was coming. Her mind tried to make itself numb, but it couldn't stop imagining the door opening, the sound of boots, the glint of armor, the smell of blood. She didn't have to wait long. Valyrius Maximus entered the room at precisely the 4th hour of the afternoon. The moment the door opened, the smell of the arena followed him in. Sweat, leather, blood, and something else. Fear. Not hers, his. He still wore his armor, bronze smeared with dried gore, the lion crest of his chest plate glinting in the lamplight. His helmet was under one arm. His free hand held nothing, but the sword strapped to his side was still fresh from use. His face was what struck her. Scarred, yes, brutal, yes, but not what she expected. There was no hunger in his eyes, no triumph, no lust, just exhaustion. Deep, heavy exhaustion, like someone who had been carrying something too heavy for far too long. He said nothing. For a full minute, neither of them moved. Livia's back stayed pressed against the stone, her body trembling despite her defiance. Gas didn't approach. He didn't even raise his voice. He just walked to the stone bench and sat down heavily, as if the weight of his armor had suddenly doubled. He dropped the helmet to the floor and buried his face in his hands. His voice, when it came, was quiet, broken. "I need your name," he said. Livia didn't answer. She didn't trust the way he spoke. It sounded too soft, too human. That wasn't how monsters sounded. He lifted his head, looked at her. His eyes weren't filled with hunger. They were haunted. "Not yours," he said again. "His, the one they killed, back in your village." Your husband?" That broke her silence. She straightened up, eyes narrowing. "He wasn't my husband," she said bitterly. "But he was supposed to be." Gas nodded slowly, as if the weight of her answer confirmed something heavy in his chest. "I had one too," he said after a moment. "A father. Jet killed him before the sword did. They said he was stealing. Said he owed. One day he was there. Next day his body was hanging over the forum." He exhaled. "That's when they took me." Livia didn't relax. But her fear shifted. He wasn't acting. He wasn't performing. This wasn't some twisted Roman ritual of mock sympathy before cruelty. He looked like a man who didn't know what to do with the power Rome had just handed him. "You have the right," she said finally, voice stiff. "Do what you came to do. I won't beg." Gas flinched like she'd slapped him. "I didn't choose this," he muttered. "You chose me. I didn't know you were still alive inside." Her laugh came sharp and bitter. "Rome doesn't let us forget. We're always alive enough to bleed." He looked down at his hands. They were calloused, thick, blood-stained, tools of killing. And yet right now they were shaking. "I've killed more men than I remember," he said. "But today I looked up and saw you in that cell and—" He paused. His next words cracked something in her. "You looked like someone I used to be." The silence between them returned, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was heavy, shared. And slowly, cautiously, Livia moved to the corner of the room, further from the door, but closer to the light. She didn't sit. She didn't relax, but she no longer looked like prey. "Just another survivor caught in Rome's grip. You can't help me," she said softly. "This chamber was built for only one purpose. It has no other ending." He looked at her for a long moment, then stood, maybe not, But you're not the only one Rome forgot how to break. He turned to the door, banged on it once. When the guard opened the slit, Gas's voice was steady, confident, just like a champion's should be. "This woman's diseased," he said. "I reject her, unfit, take her to the medica." The guard blinked, confused. But it was easier to process her out than argue with a gladiator dripping in victory. The lock clicked, the door opened. And for a fleeting moment, both of them knew they had broken something. Not the system, not the empire, but maybe, just maybe, the part of themselves that had started to believe this was the only way the world could be. They led her out like she was just another faulty piece of equipment. No ceremony, no drama. Just two guards, a muttered acknowledgement, and the metallic scrape of a door closing behind her. Livia walked in silence, head down, trying not to stumble. The torchlight in the tunnels made everything blur. Her thoughts raced, but her face stayed blank. A skill she had learned in chains. Gas didn't look back when she left. He couldn't, because if he did, if he allowed himself that final glance, it might have broken him completely. He sat in the same place long after the door closed, hands resting on his knees, heart pounding not from combat, but from the quiet terror of having defied Rome in its most sacred temple of violence. The Colosseum didn't forgive disobedience, not from captives, not from champions. He stayed seated until the master of games returned to collect the bronze tablet. The official didn't ask questions, just nodded, made a note, and left. That was how Rome operated, efficient, cold, indifferent. But Gas knew the truth. He had just stepped out of line, even if no one said it. Meanwhile, Livia was taken through another corridor, away from the gladiator chambers, past rooms filled with wounded animals, groaning prisoners, and amphorae of wine for the nobles. The medical holding area wasn't where they sent the sick to get well. It was where they sent the inconvenient to disappear. The stench hit her first. Not death exactly. Not yet, but something close. Rotting flesh, festering wounds, waste. Moans rose from behind thin wooden partitions. Not screams. Not anymore. Most of the people here didn't have the strength to scream. A Roman medic looked her over briefly. Didn't speak to her. Didn't care. She was added to a list. Possible contamination to be re-examined, the scroll said. It meant she'd be left in a corner until someone remembered she was still breathing. Or until she wasn't. The cell they gave her had no door, just a curtain. No cot, just straw, and no food. The guards dropped a bowl of water in once a day. Sometimes twice if they were bored. Livia didn't ask questions. She knew what this was. She'd been given a pause. Not a future. A delay. She waited through the night. Through the next day. Fever came quickly, even though she hadn't been ill when Gas made up the lie. Her body, already weakened by the months of marching and the stress of what almost happened, gave way. By the third day, she couldn't sit up. Her breath rasped. Her limbs ached. She thought of her village, the smoke, the screams, the way her betrothed's blood had soaked her dress. She thought of her mother's voice, soft in the mornings, humming as she ground herbs in a clay bowl. She wondered if Gas knew she was dying. Back in the barracks, Gas returned to routine. That was Rome's trick. It moved on like nothing happened. The next fight was already scheduled. The sand was already raked. The crowd was already hungry. He fought again 2 days later, and again the week after that. He won both. Not because he wanted to, but because survival was a habit now. Muscle memory. Strike, parry, kill, bow. The crowd loved him. The emperor nodded in approval. Nothing on the surface had changed, but something inside him had cracked wide open. He didn't visit the medical area. He knew he couldn't. It wasn't allowed. And even if he bribed his way in, what would he find? A corpse? A girl too broken to recognize him? He told himself it didn't matter, but he carried her name in his chest like a blade. On the third morning, a whisper reached the barracks. One of the medics, drunk on cheap wine, mentioned a Deian girl who died during the night. Should have just let the champion use her, the man laughed. At least she'd have served her purpose. Gas left the table without a word. He went to the training yard and struck the post until his knuckles split open. That night, when the others slept, he sat alone in the shadow of the barracks wall. He stared at the sky. The stars looked the same as they did when he was a boy, back when his father still carried him on his shoulders and told stories about honor. About right and wrong, Livia had said nothing heroic. She hadn't made a speech. She hadn't fought him. But in that room, she had looked at him not with hatred, but with recognition. Like he was more than the thing Rome had made him into. And for the first time in 14 years, Gas had been afraid. Not of death, but of what he'd become. When dawn broke, the arena master delivered new fight orders. 5 more victories. That's what it would take to earn his freedom. Gas Valyrius Maximus looked at the scroll. Then at the bloodied sand beyond the gates. Then I'll kill 5 more, he said. And not one more after that. Not for Rome, not for the crowd, and not for the emperor, but for Livia, who died in a room disguised as mercy, forgotten by the world that made her suffering legal. Gas became a different fighter after that day, still deadly, still brutal, still every inch the legend the crowd worshipped, but something inside him had gone quiet. Before, he fought like a man trying to escape death. Now he fought like a man who had already died once and come back colder. Every strike was cleaner, every kill faster. There was no theater left in him, no flourish, no crowd-pleasing spectacle. Just the grim, mechanical precision of someone counting down the last of his burdens. The trainers noticed. The other gladiators noticed. Even the master of games noticed. But Rome didn't care why a man fought, only that he fought. When he wasn't training, Gas stayed alone. He stopped drinking with the others, stopped wagering on the next match, stopped laughing when some drunken fighter bragged about which girl he'd claimed after his victory. The others thought he was growing arrogant, like he believed himself above them, now that freedom was close. They had no idea that the opposite was true. He felt further from manhood than he had since the day he first lifted a sword. He couldn't get the image of Livia's eyes out of his head. Not her body, not her fear, her eyes. Eyes that had seen him for what he really was. Not a champion, not a hero, just another weapon in Rome's hand. 3 weeks passed before the first rumor reached him. Quiet, careless, carried by a kitchen slave too tired to censor his tongue. The Deian girl in the Medica died slow, the slave had said. Fever, thirst. They threw her body out behind the animal pens, like waste. The other men at the table kept eating. Gas stood up and walked away without finishing his meal. That night, he dreamed of her, not of what she had suffered, but of the way she stood in that room, unbroken, even though she was already doomed. He dreamed she asked him a question. When did you stop being someone worth saving? He woke sweating, fists clenched, jaw aching from being locked tight in his sleep. The next morning he demanded extra training hours. The Lanista granted them without question. Every victory meant more coin for the ludus, and Gas was worth a fortune now. So he trained until his arms burned, until he couldn't feel the blisters tearing open again, until the ghosts in his head quieted down, not because he thought victory could wash away what had happened. He wasn't naive enough for that, but because he knew exactly what he would do the moment that wooden sword was placed in his hand. Freedom wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a debt he could never repay, but would spend the rest of his life trying to. Still, Rome always found a way to remind its prisoners how powerless they truly were. One afternoon, when he returned from drills, he found the senior medic sitting in the Lanista's office, speaking with hushed urgency. The medic's tone wasn't one of compassion. Rome didn't teach compassion. It was the uneasy tone of a man dealing with a problem that refused to stay buried. "They're asking questions," the medic murmured. "The Senate has begun an inquiry into the treatment of the Deian captives. Someone sent a petition, anonymous, too detailed to ignore." Gas stood in the doorway, unobserved, listening. "They want names of the women who died, and they want the records. Some senator's house has been talking about excesses, whatever that means." The Lanista snorted. Excesses? It was a festival. They wanted a spectacle. They got one. And now they grow soft because one of their wives read a philosopher's scroll by candlelight and thinks she understands justice. But the medic didn't laugh. His expression remained tight. The bodies were not recorded properly. Some were disposed of without documentation. If they trace missing captives back to this ludus, he didn't finish. Gas turned away before either man could notice him. For the first time since he stepped into the arena as a boy, he felt something colder than fear move through him. The knowledge that Livia's death wasn't the end of her story. Rome had meant to erase her quietly, but Rome had made a mistake. They left a crack, and cracks become fractures. Fractures become collapse. That night, Gas sat in the training yard long after the torches had been extinguished. He tilted his head back, watching the constellations move slowly overhead. Stars didn't care about empire. They didn't bow to Rome. They would still be burning long after the Colosseum was dust. He whispered her name for the first time aloud. Livia. The sound hardly traveled, but it burned in his chest like something molten. He had one purpose left, not to win, not to entertain, not even to survive, but to make sure she would not vanish the way Rome intended. The next morning, Gas requested parchment. Not for a will, not for a petition, for a record. A deliberate testimony disguised as a tally of arena debt. He listed every captive taken that day, every woman forced into the underground chambers, every body unaccounted for. With an unshakable hand, he wrote the name the medics never bothered to record. Livia, 19 years, taken from temple host procession, died unnamed in Medica. The scribe who accepted the parchment didn't understand its significance. He just nodded and filed it. But that document would not stay buried. It was the first thread in the rope that would slowly choke Rome's silence. Freedom was coming. His last victories were already scheduled. But Valyrius Maximus was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting against forgetting. 3 victories. That's all that stood between Gas and the wooden sword. Rudis, they called it. A plain piece of polished wood that didn't look like much, but it meant everything. To a gladiator, it meant freedom, citizenship, a name, a life. But for Gas, it wasn't the Rudis that mattered anymore. It was what he planned to do after. Rome didn't know it yet, but it had made a fatal mistake the moment it tried to erase Livia quietly. You don't bury truth in a system built on order. Sooner or later, someone finds the missing name, the misfiled tablet, the unaccounted body. Gas intended to make sure that someone would. He won his next fight in under 2 minutes. His opponent was a former Thracian mercenary with heavy arms and a slower foot. Gas didn't give him a chance to swing more than twice. The crowd barely had time to start chanting before it was over. The kill was clean, efficient, boring. The master of games seemed almost annoyed. Rome loved drama, not competence. No celebration, no claiming rewards, just silence and a nod from the emperor's box. The victor returned below ground alone. Later that evening, Gas was summoned, not to the training yard or the barracks, but to a chamber he hadn't been called into in years, the Domus Aurea, the golden offices behind the Colosseum reserved for Rome's political overseers of the games. 2 men waited inside. One, tall, wrapped in expensive wool robes and wearing the insignia of the Senate. A patrician, probably born rich. The other, leaner, eyes sharper, with a scroll tube strapped to his belt. A record keeper. They didn't offer Gas wine. They didn't even offer him a seat. You are Valyrius Maximus, the senator said, already knowing the answer. 17-time victor. Final match scheduled in 10 days, Gas nodded. Yes, the man opened a scroll. You filed this? It was the document, the record he had written weeks ago. The names, the unmarked captives, the missing tally. I did, Gas said, steady. The senator looked up. Why? Gas didn't flinch. Because no one else did. The senator's expression didn't change, but the edge in his voice sharpened. You're a gladiator. Your responsibility ends at the edge of your sword. This, he tapped the scroll, this is not your place. Gas stepped forward. Then why am I here? Silence. The scribe glanced nervously at the senator, then unrolled a second scroll. An internal directive from the Senate. Gas caught a glimpse of it. He couldn't read all the Latin, but he saw enough. Petition regarding Deian captives. Accusations of improper disposal. Threat of public unrest. This wasn't about morality. It was about optics. Rome didn't care that girls like Livia died. But if the public found out, if the wrong poet sang the wrong verses in the wrong tavern, suddenly questions might be asked. Not by slaves, but by senators. And senators could hurt. You will say nothing, the senator said flatly. Not to scribes, not to citizens, not to foreign visitors. Gas said nothing. The senator stepped closer, lowering his voice. You will receive your rudis, your freedom, your place in Rome's society. All we ask is your silence. What happened in the Medica is over. It was regrettable, but the system cannot be questioned. The scribe handed him a parchment. It was a formal statement of gratitude, the kind gladiators signed to acknowledge the empire's generosity in granting them freedom. At the bottom was space for his signature and a note that bound him to secrecy under imperial oath. Gas stared at it. His heart thundered, not with fear but with rage. That kind of quiet rage that doesn't shout, doesn't scream, but builds pressure until it either explodes or reshapes mountains. He took the parchment. He held it for several seconds. Then he looked up. I will fight my final match, he said, but I will not sign. The senator's jaw tightened. You refuse. I refuse silence. You know what that means? I do. He handed the parchment back and walked out. The scribe gaped. The senator said nothing, but Gas could feel the weight of what he had just done, chasing him all the way back through the stone corridors. Back in the barracks, the others didn't speak to him. Whispers had already started. Some said he had insulted a senator. Others said he was throwing away his freedom. Some even believed he'd gone mad, that too many fights had made him forget what pain felt like. But Gas didn't speak. He trained harder than ever. On the 9th day, before his final fight, he went to the slave market and used his personal winnings, not the official gladiator purse, but silver coins won in side bets, to do something no one expected. He purchased a slave, a girl, Deian, no older than Livia. She had the same dark eyes, the same defiance. She thought he'd bought her for the usual reason. He didn't touch her, didn't speak to her that night, just gave her food, let her sleep. And the next morning, he walked into the arena to fight his final match. He didn't plan on surviving it. The sun was already brutal that morning, hanging high and hot over the Colosseum like it wanted to burn Rome clean. 50,000 voices filled the air, louder than a battlefield, louder than thunder, chanting his name. Gas, Valyrius Maximus. But he didn't hear them. Not really, not like he used to. The roar that once filled him with fire now sounded like wind through a graveyard, hollow, distant, meaningless. He stepped into the arena wearing the bronze chestplate polished to a blinding gleam, his gladius sheathed at his side, helmet tucked under his arm. The blood-stained sand felt different underfoot today. Not softer, not harder, just heavier, as if it knew this was the last time he'd walk across it. Across from him stood his opponent, Lucius Priscus, a decorated champion from Capua. Younger, faster, more popular too. The crowd adored Lucius. He fought like an artist, flourishes, spins, showmanship. Rome liked its killers dramatic. Lucius raised his sword and saluted the emperor's box. The crowd roared. Gas didn't return the salute. He simply stared across the sand, jaw tight, chest steady, eyes unblinking. The master of games raised his staff. Gas exhaled. The staff dropped, and the sand exploded. Lucius rushed forward with the speed of youth, the confidence of a man who had never tasted defeat. He swung wide, trying to land a flashy opening blow, something that would dazzle the crowd. But Gas moved like water. No wasted motion. No hesitation. He ducked, sidestepped, and planted a boot square into Lucius's ribs, sending him stumbling. The crowd gasped. Lucius recovered quickly, red-faced from the public stumble. He came back harder this time, slashing low, then high. Gas blocked both strikes with bone-jarring force. Their blades sparked under the sun, and for a moment it looked like the perfect match was underway. Rome's old legend versus its rising star. But Gas wasn't here to entertain. He was here to end it. And as the second minute passed, everyone watching could feel it. The rhythm of the fight was wrong. Gas wasn't fighting like a man trying to win. He was fighting like a man trying to decide how to win. Every strike he dodged, every blow he parried, felt measured, controlled, like he knew exactly when this would be over, and then it was. Lucius lunged. Gas stepped inside the arc of the blade, grabbed his opponent's wrist, twisted hard, and plunged his gladius straight into the man's chest. Silence. Not the silence of awe, the silence of realization. Lucius collapsed without ceremony. No dramatic death cry, no final pose, just a body crumpled into the sand, blood already soaking the earth beneath him. The arena didn't erupt, it hesitated. Then came the sound, wild, stunned, confused. Cheers mixed with shouts. Some praised the efficiency. Others were angry the match ended too quickly. But all of them felt something different today, because Gas didn't raise his sword. He didn't look up to the Emperor. He just turned and walked to the center of the arena and spoke. His voice didn't need amplification. Trained by years of barking war cries and victory chants, it rang out over the amphitheater with raw authority. "You cheer for freedom," he said. "For blood, for strength," the crowd hushed again. "You name us champions. You feed us coins. You call us heroes." He paused. "But you give us that title only if we remain silent." The Emperor stirred in his seat. The guards along the edge of the arena shifted. Spectators leaned forward. Gas pointed to the imperial box, not with anger but with cold precision. "They want me to thank them, to sign my name on a parchment that says I owe my life to the Empire, that I will never speak of the things I've seen, of the women buried without names, of the ones who were promised to us as rewards." A ripple of discomfort spread through the upper tiers of the Colosseum, the patrician seats. He stepped forward, sword still in hand but lowered. "I refuse." The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or stay silent. They had never seen this before. A gladiator refusing his rudies, refusing the blessing of the Emperor. Refusing Rome? Gas tossed the sword into the dirt. "My freedom is mine," he said. "Not yours to grant, not yours to deny. I take it not because I killed enough men to earn it, but because I am done being Rome's weapon." A moment later, the guards beat. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or stay silent. They had never seen this before. Began to move. Gas raised both hands. "I fight no more," he said. "And if you try to silence me, then know this." He turned slowly, voice booming. "You can kill a man, but you cannot kill his truth." Then he looked up to the highest tier, where the commoners sat, merchants, soldiers, beggars, mothers with children. "I will speak, I will write, and I will remember. And when your sons ask what really happened beneath this arena, they will know." The first stone came from the lower level. A wealthy senator, red-faced with fury, hurled a cup of wine. It missed. Then came the second, then a third. But then something strange happened from the upper tier. A cheer broke loose, not a large one, not at first, but real, from a veteran who recognized the courage in Gas's voice, from a mother who had lost a son to war, from a child who saw in him something greater than a killer. And soon, half the arena was on its feet, not roaring like they did for blood, but standing in silence, in defiance. Gas bowed, not to the Emperor, not to the elite, but to them, and walked out of the arena gates without a sword, without a master, and without permission. He left as something Rome could never own again, a free man with a voice. They didn't stop him that day. No guards were sent to arrest him as he exited the arena. No executioners met him at the gates. No order came from the Emperor's box. Gas Valyrius Maximus walked through the marble archways of the Colosseum, blood-stained sand still clinging to his boots, and disappeared into the alleys of Rome like a shadow swallowed by sunlight. But the silence wasn't mercy. It was calculation. Rome didn't need to act immediately. It was more dangerous than that. It preferred to wait, to watch, to let a man believe he had escaped. And then, when he least expected it, to erase him so thoroughly that even the memory of his defiance would vanish with him. Gas knew this. He knew the peace he felt as he stepped into the crowded streets was a trap. That every whisper behind a market stall might be about him. That every pair of eyes following him could belong to an informant. But he also knew something else, something Rome feared more than rebellion, more than assassination, more than invasion. Memory. So he started to write, not in Latin, in Deian. The old script, the forbidden one, the language of rebels and burnt temples and dead brides. He wrote Livia's name first, her age, her village, her journey in chains. The moment she refused to fight, the moment she died in a place meant to simulate care. He wrote down the number of women taken that day, the number unaccounted for, the name of the chamber where she was held, the bronze tablet that listed her as a reward, and then he wrote about himself, not about the victories, or the cheers or the coins. He wrote about the nights spent cleaning blood from his chest with freezing water and sand, about the nightmares that never left, about the boy who watched his father hanged for owing the empire 4 silver pieces. He wrote everything, and then quietly, deliberately, he found people who would listen. Not senators, not scholars, but scribes, street poets, temple keepers, slaves, prostitutes, anyone who could carry a story and let it bloom in someone else's ear. At first it was whispers. Did you hear what the gladiator said? They say he spoke her name before the emperor. I heard he didn't take his freedom. He took it, and then those whispers turned into verses of verses into tavern songs, songs into pamphlets, and Rome began to twitch, because Rome feared stories, not the official ones carved in marble or sung by paid actors during festivals. Those were safe, controlled, approved. But the other stories, the ones whispered in alleys, scrawled on walls in charcoal, passed hand to hand in stolen scraps of parchment, those were dangerous. You couldn't burn them all. You couldn't kill everyone who heard one, especially not when the story had a name. Livia Gas went underground, not into hiding, into work. He had friends now, a former temple priestess who had once blessed shields before battles, a retired centurion who had watched too many children die in too many foreign fields, a scribe from the outer provinces who copied Roman records by day and forged new ones by night. Together, they built something small but powerful. A record, not a rebellion, not a riot, a truth. And that was when Rome finally acted. Late one night, the home where Gas was staying, nothing more than a one-room workshop in the Subura district, was surrounded. No announcement, no warning, just fire. They burned it to the ground. He wasn't inside. He'd moved 3 days earlier. The next day, Rome posted a proclamation. Gas Valyrius Maximus is hereby stripped of all honors, his victories declared void, his name removed from the registry of the Ludus Magnus. In a single scroll nailed to a public wall, the empire tried to erase him, but it was already too late, because when a city paints over a name, people ask what it said before, and now they knew he was no longer just a gladiator. He was a symbol, not of strength, but of remembrance, because for every name Rome erased, Gas made sure 10 more were spoken in their place. And when the Senate debated new laws to restrict the use of female captives in public games, when records show an unnamed gladiator's testimony submitted in closed session, everyone knew whose voice echoed in that room. Even if no one said his name, the empire would go on for centuries. It would kill and conquer and lie and burn, but in one corner of one crumbling wall in what used to be a Deian province, archaeologists would one day find something etched with a broken nail and stubborn hands. Livia lived. And I remembered. GVM. Years passed. The empire moved on, as empires always do. Wars were fought in distant provinces. Emperors rose and fell, taxes were raised, temples built, roads expanded. The Colosseum still filled with cheers, and the sand still drank its daily dose of blood. But something had changed, and not on the surface, not in marble, not in law. The change was deeper, quieter, seeded. The name Gas Valyrius Maximus no longer appeared on official rosters. Tour guides forgot to mention him. In the great ledger of Rome's champions, a blank space sat where his name had once glowed in ink and coin. But if you walked the alleys of the Subura, or sat in the quiet corners of the poorest temples, you could still hear the story. Not just about the gladiator who refused his freedom, but about the girl, about Livia, the girl who didn't kneel, the girl who stood on the sand with a wooden sword and chose love over blood, dignity over survival, silence over spectacle. The girl who didn't win, who didn't survive, who never made it past the walls of Rome's machinery, but whose name survived longer than most emperors. Gas never returned to the arena. Not once. He never stood before another crowd. Never lifted another sword. After Rome tried to erase him, he made himself harder to find. But not impossible. In the years after his disappearance, his writings began to circulate beyond Rome. In Alexandria, a scroll titled On the Value of the Forgotten was copied by temple scribes. In Carthage, a mosaic was uncovered in a hidden chamber, 20 women standing hand in hand, a single gladiator watching from the shadows, sword in the dirt. In the eastern provinces, a clay tablet was passed between slaves and servants. It bore no signature, just the carved phrase, "Let no empire teach you to forget the faces of the broken." They never caught him. Some said he escaped to Britannia, lived among the rebels, and taught their sons to fight without losing their souls. Others said he stayed in Rome, hidden in the underworld of scribes and traders, writing letters that inflamed philosophers and embarrassed senators. A few claimed he became a ghost, that he died and was buried beneath the very arena that tried to claim his soul. But every few years a fresh inscription would appear on a public wall. She lived. We remember, and so Rome trembles. The Senate never acknowledged the movement. That would have made it real. But they passed quiet decrees, lesser known, buried in the archives, that slowly choked the most brutal customs of the games. Captives were no longer listed in prize registers. The practice of carnal reward was discouraged by the imperial court. The official story, of course, was that the people had grown more civilized, but truth has a way of leaving fingerprints. One winter evening, decades later, a young boy entered the ruins of a burned-down training ludus with a torch in one hand and a book in the other. His mother had told him the story of Gas and Livia by firelight his whole childhood. Said he was descended from one of the Deian girls who survived that blood-soaked year. Said the name Valyrius still had meaning. Even if Rome refused to speak it, the boy knelt by the broken wall and placed the book in a small hollow where it couldn't be seen by passing eyes. Inside were names. Hundreds, some guessed, some known, or lost, and at the bottom, written in the same old script of a nearly dead language, Livia, 19. Taken but not forgotten. Remembered by one who chose to see her as more than a prize. He lit a single candle, said nothing, and left. The Colosseum would one day fall, its stones stolen, its glory faded, its blood-soaked legacy turned into tourist lore. But beneath it all, beneath the sand, beneath the marble, beneath the myth, there remained the echoes of something Rome never meant to leave behind. A girl who didn't kneel. A gladiator who chose memory over victory. A name that empire could not bury. Livia, and the man who remembered her, Gas Valyrius Maximus, not as a champion, not as a slave, but as a man who, for one brief moment in a broken chamber lit by oil and silence, chose humanity over empire and paid for it with everything, and in doing so, cracked the foundations of the greatest empire the world had ever known.